So JD Vance has decided that Canada, yes, Canada, is suffering from what he calls immigration insanity. According to him, our living standards are collapsing, our diversity is out of control, and the CBC is apparently the boogeyman haunting our dreams.
So we have a quick question for you. Why do you think J.D. Vance suddenly woke up and started attacking Canada? Are we a distraction, a talking point, or did someone whisper in his ears? Tell us in the comments because your answers shape where we take this next.
And look, when a US vice president says something that inflammatory about his largest trading partner, you'd assume he at least know how many provinces we have. But this wasn't policy. This was exported ideology.
And the timing? Very interesting. JD doesn't casually wake up one day and attack Canada's immigration system for no reason. But his old Yale law friend Jamil Jivani, one of Pierre Poilievre's loudest cultural warriors, did spend last week holding an event railing against DEI, multiculturalism, and so-called liberal racism.
And then, like clockwork, JD Vance posts a graph from a Halifax investment firm and calls Canada a multicultural disaster zone. You don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to see the coordination there.
So in today's video, we're unpacking the real story, why J.D. Vance attacked Canada, why Jamil Jivani is suddenly everywhere, and why this moment matters more than people realize.
So let's start with the rant. Vance retweeted a GDP per capita chart and declared that no country has leaned more into diversity as our strength. We have a salad bowl immigration insanity than Canada.
So we're now being lectured on economic policy by a man who lucked into power by hitching his wagon to a guy who is found liable for groping women and has 34 felony convictions.
He also said Canadians shouldn't blame Trump for any of this, or whatever boogeyman the CBC tells you to blame. The fault lies with your leadership.
Listen, JD, Canadians would stop blaming Trump if he would stop shoving his fat orange face into our business every 5 minutes. He's had his sights set on this country since the day he clawed his way back into office.
So, the Vice President of the United States told an entire nation to stop blaming his boss while blaming our Prime Minister. Quite a diplomatic strategy, one I think Pete Hoekstra would be proud of.
And here's the part that Vance never mentions when he compares Canada to the United States. America looks great on a GDP per capita graph, but the majority of Americans never see that wealth.
Because the US doesn't have a productivity miracle, it has an inequality explosion. 1% of the country owns more than a third of all wealth. Wall Street firms are buying up family homes, rents are climbing faster than incomes, and people working full-time jobs can't even afford a place to live.
And that's their dirty little secret behind the graph Vance keeps waving about. It's not measuring how people are doing, it's measuring how billionaires are doing.
Canada's GDP per capita looks lower, sure, but our wealth is more diversified, more spread out, more balanced. Most Canadians live in a society where the gains don't all flow to the top 1%.
So when Vance says, look at the American graph, that's what success looks like, he's talking about success for hedge funds and billionaires, not for ordinary families.
And that's why comparing GDP per capita without looking at inequality is like bragging about your house price while ignoring the fact that you're living in the basement. Vance took a real issue and invented an imaginary cause, because that cause fits his ideology.
And since we're talking about leadership, yes, Mark Carney apologized for his "who cares" comment at the G20. The apology wasn't a weakness, it was smart. And it made Carney look like a statesman. Plus, he admitted that he promised Canadians if he was elected, he would admit his mistakes, and that's exactly what he did.
And speaking of who cares, you should go and check out our store because we just dropped new Who Cares mugs, t-shirts, and toots. Perfect for anyone who thinks Canada should stop taking lectures from men with felony counts higher than their approval ratings.
Canada does have economic challenges. Everybody knows productivity has been stuck for years.
But that has nothing to do with the type of immigrants Canada welcomes.
It's about underinvestment, slow infrastructure, red tape, and decades of businesses refusing to modernize.
So immigration isn't the culprit. It's not even in the top 5.
And here's the part that Vance really hopes Americans never hear. Canada's finally fixing the things that held us back.
Because in just 7 months, Prime Minister Mark Carney has cut through more red tape than the last three governments combined. Interprovincial trade barriers coming down. Major projects fast-tracked, not talked to death. Clean energy corridors, infrastructure upgrades, northern development, all actually happening instead of under review forever.
Carney's rebuilding the foundations of the country. He's investing in productivity, innovation, nation building, and he's not panicking about who moved here last year.
So the idea that Canada is collapsing under immigration while we're modernizing the entire economy isn't just wrong. It's embarrassing for anyone repeating it.
Speaking of repeating it, let's talk about timing because this matters. Jivani, Vance's buddy from Yale Law, held an event days early accusing Canada of liberal racism and denouncing DEI and multiculturalism. 3 days later, J.D. Vance launches his immigration attack on Canada.
Jivani has become the Canadian megaphone for U.S.-style racial resentment politics. And Vance, who pushes a blood-and-soil nationalist ideology in the U.S., is more than happy to amplify that message.
And the Toronto Star nailed it when they said Vance isn't critiquing our economy, he's evangelizing an identity-based worldview.
And that identity-based worldview of his says a country isn't defined by shared values or democratic institutions or opportunity or the choices people make together. It's defined by who lived there first, by bloodlines, by ancestry, by cultural homogeny.
That's the core of the so-called national conservatism. It's the idea that a nation only stays strong if it stays ethnically consistent. This is scary. So when Vance says Canada leaned too far into multiculturalism or the salad bowl, he's not talking about economics. He's talking about identity and who belongs and who doesn't.
And here's the part Vance conveniently ignores. The United States is a nation built by immigrants. Canada is a nation built by immigrants. If he wants a country defined by bloodlines and ancestry, he should probably start by getting off Indigenous land.
Because the only people with a legitimate claim to that kind of pure lineage argument are the First Peoples of the entire continent. And somehow, they never make it into his speech about national identity.
And now Vance is trying to export that same worldview to Canada. Trying to turn our multicultural identity, the thing we actually all agree on, into something dangerous.
And once you see it through that lens, the whole rant makes sense. He wants a divided Canada because it's easier to take over. But he doesn't realize that immigrants from all over the world help build the country we live in today, and we're proud of it.
And he uses the same language everywhere. He wants to divide countries because division makes them weaker. Earlier this year in Munich, he warned Europeans that they were committing civilizational suicide by accepting immigrants. He claimed they'd opened the floodgates to unvetted immigrants.
And the thing is, we were in Munich a few years ago, and we remember those conversations really well. People were proud of accepting refugees. They were proud of standing up for humanitarian values and proud of helping people flee war disaster.
And now along comes J.D. Vance, a guy who's visited Europe maybe twice in his life, telling Germans that they should be ashamed of the exact thing that they were proud of. Turning compassion into a warning sign, turning solidarity into a threat, turning humanitarian choices into civilizational suicide.
That's the damage of this worldview. It takes the best instincts of a society and tries to turn them into weakness.
And now, Canada is his latest stage. Not because of our GDP curve, but because our multicultural identity contradicts everything he's selling at home. He wants to turn Canada, a multicultural democracy, into a warning for Americans, and turn that point of pride into a point of fear.
To Vance, we're not a partner. We're a cautionary tale to spread his propaganda to the hate-filled MAGAs of the USA.
So when Vance calls Canada a salad bowl disaster, what he's really doing is comparing our entire immigration philosophy, nation-building, multiculturalism, openness, to a doctrine rooted in fear. Two entirely different visions of what a country should be.
So why now? Well, 3 reasons. First, he's Trump's heir and he could be president in 3 years, so he's got to start doubling down on that division. Second, Canada is the perfect foil for authoritarians, a peaceful, multicultural democracy, exactly what Vance wants to discredit. And third, Canadian Conservatives are already using the same talking points.
And then, of course, he goes and he blames the CBC, because nothing terrifies a US vice president like the idea of Canadians watching power and politics and forming their own opinions.
But that detail matters because when Vance attacks Canada, he also attacks every Canadian institution that refuses to adopt his worldview.
And that's exactly what Pierre Poilievre did too. He shared the same graph, made the same claim, and blamed the same person, Mark Carney. According to Poilievre, wherever Carney goes, inflation rises, housing collapses, and living standards fall. It's impressive. If Mark Carney is that powerful, he shouldn't be prime minister. He should be running the Marvel universe.
Different country, same talking points. Because this isn't just a tweet, it's an ideological pipeline.
Jamil, Jivani, and Pierre Poilievre are building the ideological bridge between American nationalism and Canadian conservatism.
And this isn't random at all. It's coordinated political framing.
So here's what Canadians need to understand. Canada does have economic challenges, sure, but J.D. Vance twisting those challenges into a racial argument is not analysis, it's opportunism.
And when politicians on both sides of the border start sharing the same charts, the same rhetoric, and the same ideology, we should all start paying attention.
Because this wasn't about a chart, it was about shifting blame, shifting culture, shifting identity, and trying to drag Canada into a political project that we didn't sign up for.
So yes, Vance's rant matters, not because it was correct, but because it was not.
And we need to make sure that we keep that kind of rhetoric out of Canada. So when Pierre Poilievre repeats the same talking points, or when Jamil Jivani acts as a Canadian echo chamber for American grievance politics, we have to stand up and say something.
Those talking points are designed to divide people who've lived beside each other for decades, just to score political points.
And that is not leadership, and it's definitely not Canadian.
And if we don't call it out, loudly, consistently, unapologetically, it spreads. And once that kind of politics takes root, it's impossible to pull out. Just look at our neighbors to the south.
So the message is simple. Canada doesn't need imported culture wars. We don't need fear campaigns dressed up as economic analysis. And we sure as heck don't need politicians who borrow their worldview from the worst actors south of the border.
Yep, we can do better, and we already are.
And if you found this breakdown useful, hit subscribe, because we cover Canada-US politics every day, and we're not here to be polite about misinformation.
So drop a comment. Do you think J.D. Vance's attack was coordinated with Jamil Jivani? Or was he just bored and needed a new country to misunderstand?
And share this with someone who still thinks Canada's problems start at the border. Trust me, they'll thank you later.
See you tomorrow, everyone.
Thanks for watching. Ciao for now.